Story 1. Don't swim in the sinkholes in Mexico. Most of us live in naive ignorance. We live in an existence perpetuated by the modern world that has us believing everything can be rationally explained. Science, reason, and logic have, for the most part, appeared to have triumphed over superstition. I was once like this too, understanding with near certainty that if I could not touch or observe something myself, that it was likely to have no substance behind it, and not exist. This all changed when I lost my wife. We had been together for years, and our favorite thing to do was travel together. The only issue was that we had very different ideas of what constituted a vacation. She loved lounging on beaches, reading books and sipping fruity drinks as she relaxed and forgot about the hustle of the world back home. I, on the other hand, am a huge history buff. I love visiting ancient sites and walking in the footsteps of those who had lived hundreds or thousands of years before. Naturally, this meant that we took several trips to the Mediterranean as a compromise: Italy, Greece, Spain, and Egypt, to name a few. All places where you can easily find nice beaches and historical sites within a stone's throw. The pandemic, however, really put a stop to our plans for several months. As we were on lockdown and constantly working from home, the idea of an escape started to become more and more appealing. Unfortunately, no place in Europe would take us at the time, having closed off their borders to Americans. However, we did find a place which was accessible to us: Mexico. The more we looked into it, the more perfect it began to seem. Countless beaches and resorts, and if we chose the right region, we could easily take a day tour to some Maya ruins. We would both get what we wanted, and also finally be able to get out of the house for a little while. I booked us the plane tickets and resort room, and in a few weeks, we were packing and getting all ready for our trip. The flight there went smoothly, as did the first few days of our vacation. I hate to admit it, but my wife did have a point. It was nice to just lay there on a beach, having cocktails and not having to worry about a thing. The resort we were staying in was nice, with all of our meals and drinks already included. Given how much the world had changed in just the last several months, it was nice to finally take a break from everything. The day of our book tour came just a couple days before we were scheduled to fly home. A scheduled tour bus picked us up in a designated location along with tens of other tourists. The tour guide, Miguel, laid out our schedule of the day as the bus began to drive. We would first be taken to the ancient Maya ruins of Chichen Itza, followed by a lunch at a local restaurant. After this, we would stop for a brief swim in a cenote, which is a sinkhole that exposes groundwater, after which we would be brought back to our hotel. I found walking the ruins of Chichen Itza very interesting. Miguel took us all on a guided tour of the site, explaining the ancient way of life of the Maya. He went into great depths about their gods, such as Itzum, who appeared to be the head honcho among all the gods, the rain god Chak, and Ekchua, the god of human sacrifice. Although she wasn't nearly as intrigued as I was, I could tell my wife feigning fascination for my sake. I could tell she was very much looking forward to a swim in the cenote, as that appeared to be more in line with what she enjoyed to do, and of course would give her some pretty epic picture to put up on Instagram. Once we had finished touring Chichen Itza and had finished eating our lunch, our tour bus took us to the cenote. I must admit, it was very picturesque. The light coming in from the top of the sinkhole gave the water an exceptionally light blue appearance. The limestone surrounding the interior of the sinkhole gave it a much more surreal form. We were told we had an hour in the cenote, which was plenty of time to swim around and take pictures. True to his word, within an hour, Miguel had called us all back, saying that time was up and that we had to return to the tour bus. Of all the tourists, my wife and I had swum the furthest away from the crude ladder that was used to get into the water. We waited as all the other tourists had gotten out of the water and started walking out of the cenote, and then we began to swim over to the ladder, jokingly making it into a race. Childishly ecstatic that I had won, I climbed up the ladder first, with both of us laughing over the moment of fun that we had just had. As I made the transition from the last step of the ladder to the platform, I heard a splash and some air bubbles. I turned around, only to see that my wife was no longer there. I thought it was a joke at first, so I just stood there with my arms crossed and a smug look on my face, waiting for my wife to breach the surface of the water laughing. 10 seconds. 30 seconds. After a minute, I became worried. I jumped in to find her, but the cenote was too deep, and the visibility under the water not great to begin with. I jumped out, barely noticing that it had started to rain, and frantically ran to Miguel, hysterically explaining everything that had happened. The Mexican authorities were called in, and came with some diving equipment. They frustratingly took their time, believing that after all the time had passed since my wife had gone missing, that this wasn't a rescue, but a body retrieval. They spent what seemed like hours diving in the cenote, but couldn't find any trace of her. They appeared to want to just give up and go home. I pleaded with them in hysterics. I didn't know any Spanish and they knew very little English, most of the translation between us being done by Miguel. As I sank to the ground about to break into tears, one of the officers patted me on the shoulder. I looked up at him. He was an older man, probably in his 50s or 60s, probably not too far from retirement. He had a look of pity on his face. Sorry, Mijo," he said. "The old gods, they still take sometimes." With another pat on my shoulder, he walked to join his comrades in the police car. I was shuttled back to my hotel, sitting in a dumbstruck silence. All I could think about was what that officer had told me. The old gods. Sometimes, they still take. Upon returning to our room, all I wanted to do was lay down and cry. Just 12 hours ago, I had my wife here with me, and now, I was all alone. I couldn't, though. I couldn't just lay there and give up. I had this feeling that I had to do something. Anything. I opened up my laptop and started digging through whatever information I could find. On cenotes, on this particular region of Mexico, on the Maya. Anything that was even remotely related, I read up on. I found out that within a reasonable drive of where I was staying, there was a region of Mexico that remains heavily populated by Maya who still follow some of the old traditions and beliefs of their ancient ancestors. As soon as the sun rose, I rented a car and made my way in the direction of this area. About an hour in, the road ceased to be paved, and I was driving on dirt. I stopped at every village I could. I stopped to talk to everyone who was on the side of the road. I pleaded with them to help me. Unfortunately, this wasn't an area where English was known. I used hand gestures, and every other form of communication I could possibly think of, but nothing was working for me. After what seemed like hours of trying to communicate with the local Maya, I was ready to just sink to my knees as I did near the cenote and give up. At that moment, a woman carrying a basket of corn passed by. "I hear you, you speak to others," she said. I was dumbstruck. It was obvious her English was very rudimentary, but it was the most I heard out of anyone near here. Without another word, I simply went on about what had happened to my wife. She listened, probably only understanding less than half of what I was saying, but her eyes got wide when I mentioned the word cenote. God Chak, very powerful. Live in bottom of cenote. Who? I asked back. Chak. God of, she seemed to not have the words. She pointed to the sky and then made a gesture with her fingers coming down. Rain, I exclaimed. See. Rain, she answered back. In old time, before Spanish, our people pushed pretty girls in cenote. For Chak. He give rain. It was all making sense. The ancient Maya used to sacrifice young girls in cenote all over the Yucatan Peninsula. Cenote just like the one we were swimming in just the other day. I threw a $100 bill at the woman in my haste without saying another word and got back in the car. I drove back all the way on the dirt road, past the tourist area that we were staying at, and all the way back to the cenote. I noticed it was abandoned with no tourists. Probably none of the tour guides wanted to risk it after what had happened to my wife just the day before. I spoke to the water, feeling like an idiot, but not knowing what else to do. I pleaded with Chak. I begged him. Finally, I promised him. As soon as the last word left my lips, bubbles appeared at the surface. My wife breached the water, looking just as she had the last time I saw her. I helped her out of the cenote and embraced her harder than I ever have before. I told her that I loved her. She appeared confused as to why we were alone at the cenote at night, and as I spoke more to her, she appeared to have no memory of the past day. I didn't press the subject any further, driving us back to our hotel. We only had a day left in our vacation after all that, and I let her enjoy every second of it, lounging on the beach, although my heart did drop every time she stepped in the water. Fortunately, nothing bad happened. We flew back home the next day with no problem, and just a couple months later, I was ecstatic when she told me that we would be expecting our first child soon. Just the other day though, we learned something that made me far less excited. Something that made me much more anxious. Something that reminded me of the promise I had made to Chak as I knelt next to the water of the cenote pleading for him to return my wife. It turns out that our baby is going to be a girl. Story 2. My name is Rig. I graduated from my university's pilot program a little over a year ago, and I was lucky to have some made golden connections to get on with a Part 135 flight chartering company flying Cessna Citation CJ3S. Back in June of 2022, the company wanted to change from an authorized single-pilot operation to a multi-pilot operation with the caveat that they didn't want to pay the co-pilot very much. Being a junior pilot, I was all too happy to accept almost literal peanuts for pay as long as I got my type rating and multi-engine turbine time under my belt. My designated pilot examiner, or DPE, who helped sign me off for all of my licenses is one of the chief pilots, and after asking him about any job opportunities, he was open to nominating me for the position. During onboarding, I learned more about the charter operation and what we did. While we would, of course, fly around a bourgeois-rich family here or there for vacations, we focused primarily on medevac-type transport jobs. Taking a small crate with a human heart for a transplant from Denver to Seattle, taking an eye specialist doctor from Boise to Los Angeles, flying a rich guy to get his 4th cosmetic surgery of the year and it is only March 24th, that sort of thing, that is about 80% of our clientele. It is a fantastic first real flying job. To help underscore this for anyone here who isn't a pilot, this is a unicorn-level job opportunity that I have been incredibly grateful and lucky to have. I am very lucky to be working with my mentor, Brandon, and one of my friends, Kyle. Due to its importance to my little problem, I have a couple of words about Kyle. He is a good friend and a good employee. Kyle had recently become a sort of intern from the university that wants to work for us when he becomes a pilot, he himself holding a new commercial pilot certificate. Knowing that, whenever we have flights on Monday and Wednesday afternoons/evenings, he tags along and sits in the back to act as a type of flight attendant when needed. He always has a really good attitude and is eager to do anything that helps us out, and that helps take away some of the more mundane tasks for me so I can concentrate on pilot work versus filling out logs and paperwork for flights. For people familiar with air operations, he takes on a bit of a dispatcher role for us sometimes, and builds flight plans and weather briefings that the captain will look over and approve or improve upon. Because Kyle and I are so close in age, and we know / are friends with some of the same people from the university's flight school, we quickly became friends ourselves. Last week though, that loose definition of friend was really put to the test. I woke up to a drunk call from him at 0130 asking me to pick him up from a local bar. When I walked in to find him and asked him what was going on, he informed me that he and his girlfriend were having a spat and she had broken up with him. When he was done crying, I told him to pull himself together, drink some water, and I took him back to his apartment. Since then, we have been good friends, playing Helldivers 2 and Hunt Showdown together with a few of our common friends, and really just having a good time when I have time. Coincidentally, him and his girlfriend were able to work some of their issues out with advice from my wife, who is a licensed MFT, and he has been able to get back on track. Overall, my job may be a lot at times, but I am absolutely in love with it. I guess until about a few hours ago when that all changed. I have been flying for the past 2 days now, doing point-to-point pickups for my company with one of the other senior pilots. Needless to say, I was exhausted as we got back into my home base here in Utah earlier today. It was snowing pretty bad the other night and into this morning, so after I did all the grunt work of getting the plane back into the hangar and finishing logging the hobs/tatch times for the plane, I went into the pilot's room upstairs near the only heater in the building. The plan was to have a quick hot drink, get the flight plan ready and filed, and to take a 3-hour nap before the next turnaround to New Mexico. I turned on the electric kettle, sat down on the couch, pulled out my iPad, texted Captain Brandon that everything was going to be ready before he got here. After that, and I texted my buddy Kyle to let him know we had a flight at 1700 and that it would be a rare overnight flight because the cargo we were transporting had a destination that was also a pickup spot for our trip tomorrow morning, transporting for the same hospital. I texted Kyle that he was more than welcome to come and see what it was like to pick up a tissue sample from a medical courier on field and get the experience, even if it meant he would need to spend the night in Farmington, New Mexico with us. While I got up to make myself a hot drink, I looked out the window through the light snow at the woods across the way. Through the tree's branches off the right of the window, I saw a buck elk standing there in front of the trees across the road on the other side of the airport fence. It was looking at me. It didn't look correct. I first noticed with the eyes, even from this distance the eye angled the best to my vision just looked like nothing. A single, black pit. Looking more closely, the animal looked hungry. I know in winter time, there isn't a lot to nibble on for them, but this one looked worse than I had seen of them round this time of year. Even from up here, and a little more than 100 feet away, I could see the outline of its ribs. As I was staring at it from inside the building, I just kept getting this weird feeling because I was so interested in looking at this elk. I stepped closer to the window, but I don't actually remember any conscious effort on my part to do so. It was almost magnetic. I felt almost mesmerized, looking into the points of black. As I walked up to the window, everything started to sound distant. Things became more and more muddled. I subconsciously noticed the click from the kettle turning off and the rolling, boiling water, but it sounded so distant. My footsteps on the hardwood portion of the kitchenette didn't creak. The crunch from the crisp carpet didn't whisper. All I could hear was the silence and a light wind from the light snow outside through the window. The bull elk was still facing me, its onyx eyes still looking toward me standing in the kitchenette of hangar's upper mezzanine. As we locked eyes for what both felt like an eternity, and only a split moment, I saw it shudder a movement. That is when I saw it stand up on its hind legs. In utter silence, I witnessed the elk stand. Carefully. Knowingly. I watched as it slowly walked on its legs as a man would, creeping with each deliberate step, finding purchase through the snow and on the icy ground below. I watched in horror as it crept closer to the fence line, crouching under tree branches which would have inhibited its constant stare. I don't remember any noise coming out, but I remember I was screaming. The vision of the elk disappeared from my view as I fell backwards from the window. The next thing I remember is waking up on the couch screaming. As I leaned up looking towards the window, I saw Kyle sitting on the armchair in the corner of the room reading one of the aviation weather books we have on the coffee table. He quickly lowered the book, with a blank, startled look. "Hey Kyle. Sorry about that. I just had a bit of a nightmare, I think. Hope I didn't scare you." "No, I am fine." "Good to hear it. Thanks for coming with the snow being as bad as it is. I hope we will be good to just de-ice and head out when Captain Brandon gets here. I hope the airport snow removal team is keeping the runway clear. It is always a drag to have to wait for them." As I got up, I went over the kettle and started boiling the water again, as it was only lukewarm because of my nap. The rest of the prep went rather smoothly, albeit a bit more delayed than I would have liked. Due to my nap, I caught a bit of a lecture from Brandon about filing IFR flight plans earlier than I had, and I was outright criticized for not pre-flighting the airplane before he arrived. During the pre-flight, Kyle got on board the airplane and was just super stoic. He would answer us, giving generally one-sentence replies and looking back out the window of the passenger cabin. He just wasn't being his positive and generally laid-back self. Knowing about his relationship issues, I really didn't push it, fearing that his girlfriend may have pulled the plug on their relationship again, but being at work and with Brandon around, I didn't want to ask. The rest of the flight went as normal. I finished pre-flighting, turned off my phone, called up the clearance delivery frequency, we departed, pretty standard stuff. We got into Farmington just fine, handed the plane over to the FBO after meeting with Guardian, the medical courier company who was taking the tissue sample to the hospital, and we rode in the FBO car to the motel after we got food at the bar and grill on the airport by the control tower. I am currently sitting here in my motel room, talking to you all because when I turned my phone on to call my wife, after a short delay to get service, I got this message. "Hey Rick, sorry I missed your text, I was in classes all day and forgot to respond. I just got to the hangar because the roads are super bad, so I see I am already too late to catch you and Brandon. I'll see you when you get back." In that moment, my blood ran colder than the wind ripping through New Mexico tonight. I simply don't know what to think. I don't know who is next door. Reddit, I am going to be honest, I didn't have the nerve to tell Brandon about what happened earlier because I don't want to lose my credibility as a pilot or cause concern for my mental state. The FAA can be a little touchy about mental health, and a concern from a chief pilot about mental fitness to fly can be a career ender if it were to escalate. Now, I don't know what to do. He is in the room right next to me at this dirty motel here in New Mexico, and I am just at a loss. I don't know who that is next door, but I know two things. That isn't Kyle, and we are supposed to fly back tomorrow morning, and I don't know how to tell my mentor/boss/friend. Edit, 2032 to 2112 local time. I took some modified advice to text Kyle, "Hey man, how's your day? You doing good?" to see if he would open up. I am officially scared now. I got a response, "Not bad brother, not bad." Tidied up the hangar after I got there. Topped off the de-icing fluid drum and pressed bottles. Lacey and I are watching a movie. Note it's a cleaner we use for our windscreens and debugger for crushed bugs. This thing is officially not Kyle. I went out to get ice and took the opportunity to kinda look/listen at his room. It's pitch black, so it is either asleep or just in there. In the dark. I don't know, it's a scary thought. Story 3. Please don't play the face game. The face game can be played by 4 or more people. Players must begin the game alone and in absolute darkness. If any sources of light or observers are present, the game will fail. But the game itself is simple. Players stand in a circle, with one player in the center. The player in the center is called the judge. The players who form the circle are called the pretenders. In the center of the circle, the judge spins counterclockwise, while the pretenders rotate clockwise around them. The players continue to spin until the judge announces in a loud voice, I wonder, whose face will I find?" The pretenders then freeze and take 3 steps backward, widening the circle. The judge can no longer be sure who or what is standing where. They must approach the first pretender and attempt to identify them by touching their face. If the judge touches any part of a pretender apart from their face, or if a pretender moves or speaks, the game fails. A pretender can sneer, scrunch up their nose, or otherwise manipulate their face to make themselves more difficult to identify. When the judge is confident about a pretender's identity, the judge announces loudly, "This face belongs to the pretender's full, true name." If the judge is incorrect, the face game ends. Otherwise, the game continues, and the judge approaches the next pretender. If the judge correctly identifies all of the pretenders, the judge wins, and the face game ends. If a pretender successfully deceives the judge, the pretenders win, and the face game ends. There is, however, a third possible outcome. During the face game, it is possible that the judge might touch a face that they are unable to identify, a face that belongs to someone, or something, that wasn't present when the game began, the outsider. The judge must take their time with the face of the outsider, being sure to touch every part. They must not be discouraged or frightened by weeping sores, strange protrusions, or squirming things beneath the outsider's flesh. Even if the outsider bites the judge, licks them, or makes its skin abrasive, the judge must continue until they have touched every part of the outsider's face. The pretenders must remain in their places. They must not move or speak, regardless of any foul odors, unnatural sounds, or changes in temperature that the outsider might produce. When the judge has completely touched every part of the outsider's face, they must loudly announce, "I do not know who this face belongs to, but surely it is the most beautiful face of all." The outsider then disappears, and the face game ends. However, if the pretenders move or speak, if the judge fails to completely touch the outsider's face or doesn't pronounce the game-ending phrase correctly, or if the outsider successfully impersonates one of the pretenders, the outsider wins the face game. And what happens if the outsider wins the face game? My best friends and I found out on Halloween night, 1999. Light as a feather, stiff as a board, light as a feather, stiff as a board, the five of us chanted, but Amy didn't budge. My fingers hurt, I was starting to sweat in Clara's stuffy unfinished basement, and I thought that choosing our heaviest friend for the witchy ritual might not have been the best idea. I wanted, desperately, for it to work. I think we all did. Mostly because now that we were 12, Halloween had started to seem sort of lame. Erica had stolen her brother's copy of Scream, but it hadn't made us jump and shriek the way we used to. Eating so much candy had made us all feel sick to our stomachs, and the flickering tea candles Christina had set up felt cliché instead of spooky. We all wanted that special Halloween magic back, even if it was just for one more night. The basement door opened with a creak, we all jumped and let Amy drop. "Ow!" Amy groaned, clutching her head. Clara's older sister Holly stood backlit by the rectangle of light at the top of the basement stairs. "Are you still trying to do that stupid trick?" Holly sneered. "You know it's fake, right?" Holly was 2 years older than us, and, according to herself, about 10 times cooler. Maybe it was just the sweltering basement or my frustration with our disappointing Halloween night, but I suddenly just couldn't take any more of Holly's superiority complex. "Oh, let me guess." I snapped. "I bet you know one that really works, right?" How I wish I could take those words back now. Holly's mouth opened and closed soundlessly a few times. She couldn't believe that one of her little sister's friends had actually talked back to her. "I do." Holly spat, when her jaw finally started working again, "and I'll prove it." She slammed the basement door on her way out, and we could hear Clara's parents haranguing her upstairs. We all looked at each other and giggled. Holly was gone a long time. "Here." She stormed down the stairs and shoved a sheet of printed paper into my hands. "The face game, read the header." "This isn't some game you knew about." I snorted. "You just printed it off from somewhere. Look, the ink's not even dry. You're just too scared to play it. Anyway, I'm going to talk to my boyfriend, so do not come upstairs." Holly shouted over her shoulder, before slamming the door and getting yelled at once again. We read through the instructions several times. It didn't seem complicated, but even as a preteen, I wondered about the face game. It seemed so simple, so anonymous. Who had created the face game? Why? At the time, I didn't have any answers. The five of us stood in a circle, waiting for Clara's parents to click off the television and go to bed. When the house was finally quiet, we began. I volunteered to be the judge. It had looked easy on paper, but spinning in circles in Clara's stuffy, pitch-black basement went to my head immediately. I had barely twirled 5 times when the floor began to feel wobbly beneath my feet. I wonder whose face will I find?" I shouted queasily, starting the game. It had sounded like there were a lot more than just my friend's footsteps circling around me in the dark, but when I spoke, all sound stopped. Standing dizzily in the complete darkness made me feel like an astronaut from one of the documentaries we watched in school, floating alone in the lightless, hostile void of space. With a shiver, I took a step forward, then another. Where were my friends? I held my out in front of me and staggered blindly forward. When my fingers touched flesh, I nearly shrieked. A face. Fortunately, the first one was easy. It was a round face with soft, pudgy features, and if that weren't enough, there wasn't a drip of sweat on it. That meant it could only belong to Amy, the girl we'd been trying to lift with our spell. I felt around her face, just to be sure, then called out. "This face belongs to Amy Leanne McCade." I heard Amy let out a sigh of relief. No one else spoke. The game would go on. The next face was bony and twitchy. Whoever it was didn't want to make it easy for me. They wrinkled their nose and lips so much that for a terrifying moment I thought that I was touching the outsider described in the rules, but then I realized that whatever I was touching trimmed its eyebrows and used strawberry shampoo. Only one person I knew was such a pain. This face belongs to Clara Simmons. Wrong. Christina laughed. Sudden footsteps, a bang, me, cursing. Kelsey flipped the lights back on. I was standing in front of Christina. Clara was after her the circle. The darkness had made me more sensitive to smell, I supposed, and besides, I'd figured that only Clara would try to trip me up. I'd forgotten how sneaky Christina could be. My friends, the pretenders, had won the face game. I felt my cheeks burning. Holly's stupid paper printout game had been more difficult than I thought, and I looked and felt like an idiot. I was angry with them, but even more angry with myself. Well, since you won, Christina, why don't you be judge next? I challenged her. Christina just shrugged. I realized that none of the others understand what I was so angry about. They didn't understand the tension and fear that came with being the judge, that weird sensation of touching a suddenly unfamiliar face in the dark. Before I knew it, the lights clicked off, and we began to spin. I don't know if Christina had a higher tolerance for dizziness or if she just wanted to show off, but she twirled for what felt like forever. Candy sloshed sickeningly in my stomach, and I wondered what would happen if someone passed out during the face game. I wonder, whose face will I find? Christina sighed in a sing-song voice. We froze. After taking 3 steps back, that feeling was back, the sensation of being alone in the universe. There was nothing to do but wait for hands to touch my face. I heard shuffling feet. Wiggling. A barely stifled giggle. This face belongs to Clara Simmons. Clara groaned. Christina moved on. She barely took 2 minutes to identify the next pretender. This face belongs to Erica Rebecca Moss. Christina was moving fast, maybe too fast. I heard her uncertain footsteps as she nearly walked outside the circle and had to double back, feeling her way through the dark just as I had. Suddenly, Christina gasped. Then, silence. What was taking her so long? And when had Clara's basement gotten so cold? I shivered. If it weren't for the total darkness, I was sure I would have been able to see my breath. A foul smell like rotten eggs invaded my nostrils. Something was wrong. I desperately wanted to ask Christina what was going on, and yet, if a pretender moves or speaks, the outsider wins the face game. I heard a sick gurgling noise, followed by another, more recognizable sound, Christina weeping. I do not know whose face this is, Christina sobbed, but, surely, it is the most argh. I couldn't take any more. I didn't care what happened after the game ended, it just had to stop. I stumbled forward into the pitch blackness, feeling for the light switch. I should have slipped on bean bags and candy wrappers, or slammed into the basement furniture. I should have found the stairs. But the darkness seemed to go on forever. Clara? Christina? I asked nervously. No response. It was like my words had been swallowed up. I wrapped my arms around myself against the chill, but it was useless. The cold penetrated all the way to the bone. When I held my jaw to stop my teeth from chattering, I thought for sure I could hear someone screaming, but it felt very far away. No matter how far I walked forward or backwards, I couldn't reach the basement wall. I knelt down and touched the floor. Instead of Clara's carpet, I touched something as cold and smooth as ice. Is anyone there? I cried. From somewhere behind me, I heard a low, rumbling sound that might have been laughter. The next thing I knew, I was blind. Ugh! A dark figure surrounded by light shouted down at me. What are you twerps doing down here? Mom and Dad are pissed. I knew that voice, Clara's older sister Holly, at the top of the stairs once more. My friends were scattered around the basement like broken toys, terrified and exhausted, all except Christina. Christina stood in the center of the room, her face expressionless. She opened and closed her fingers and toes as if using them for the first time. She wriggled the muscles in her face, as though trying to understand how to move them. And then she smiled. "Your stupid game didn't work," Christina yelled up the stairs. The rest of us looked at each other. It had worked too well. Christina had touched the outsider. She should know that better than anyone, and yet... Of course it didn't work. Holly rolled her eyes. "I just printed it out from some message board so you losers wouldn't bother me while I talked to Brandon. He doesn't even like you," Christina said flatly. "What?" Holly's eyes grew wide. "Why don't you ask Brandon what he did with Shelley Spicer from second period at Alex Hoffold's homecoming party?" Christina sneered. How do you know about that?" Holly stammered. "Anyway, Brandon didn't even go, he told me so." "That wasn't what he told Shelley." "Ask him. You'll see." Without another word, Holly slammed the door. We all stared. "What?" Christina shrugged, examining her fingernails. "Holly Simmons is a bitch. She deserved it." "Chris, what happened to you?" I asked. "Pfft," Christina snorted. "Don't tell me you're still talking about that stupid game. Just before everything got weird, you found the outsider, didn't you?" "I heard you, but surely it is the most beautiful face of a..." "Don't tell me you actually fell for that." Christina threw her head back and laughed. "I was just messing with you. You're still such a baby. I mean, none of the rest of you were scared, right?" Christina looked from face to face. One by one, each of my friends shook their heads. I couldn't believe it. I'd seen how bewildered and frightened they were when the face game finally ended. I knew that, like me, they'd been shivering and lost, trapped in that cold, dark other place. I felt betrayed, but I couldn't blame them. There was a menacing new look in Christina's glare, as though something ancient and cruel was staring out from behind her eyes. I think, on a deeper level, I already knew the truth. The real Christina was gone forever, trapped in that freezing abyss, and maybe even destined to become an outsider herself. The thing that had come back inside her shell was something else entirely, an outsider, and it had no problem turning my friends against me. We were young, impressionable, and, to be honest, afraid of what Christina had become. Throughout the fall and into the winter, Christina followed me. In the whirl of corner leaves as the yellow school bus rounded the corner, just outside my bathroom stall at school, standing in the new fallen snow outside my bedroom window. She never spoke, but the message was clear: never speak of what you know. Once she was confident of my silence, Christina, or the thing inside her, got to work on its favorite pastime, destroying the lives of the people around her. Her parents divorced, citing irreconcilable differences, but I knew the real reason. They wanted to escape from their daughter. They wanted to escape from the outsider. In time, Christina's sadistic games drove Kelsey and Eric away. They became her new targets, and the way she teased them throughout high school crossed the line from bullying to torture more than once. Those who stayed close to her weren't so lucky. She got Clara hooked on heroin her junior year, and Amy was killed in a car crash when Christina blackmailed her into driving drunk on prom night. Sometimes it was over quickly, sometimes it dragged on for years, but Christina always wrung every drop of suffering she could from the people around her before throwing them away. To her, suffering seemed to be a sort of game. I usually kept my distance from hometown gossip, but in Christina's case, it was like being the spectator to a horrific natural disaster. I just couldn't look away. In dive bars and beauty salons, I learned of the career she'd left in ruins, the relationships she'd wrecked, the pain and death that followed her like a black cloud. Eventually, she wound up in prison. Given her love of cruel games, manipulation, and control, I'm sure she enjoyed every minute of it. I ran into one of the correctional officers who worked in her unit by chance a few years later. His name was Mark. He'd gone to high school with Christina and I, and, like me, he was now terrified of her. I noticed a cast on his left arm. She basically rules the cell block. The inmates are all afraid of her, and so are the guards. You should hear the stories that the cops tell, the ones who arrested her in the first place. They said she was crawling up the walls like a goddamn spider, and that's not the worst of it. We were standing in the aisle of a busy supermarket, but I suddenly felt cold and alone, like I had when we played the face game. Mark looked over his shoulder before continuing, "The worst part is how she manipulates people." Know what I mean? I did. I thought of Erica with her head in a high school toilet. Clara with a needle in her arm. Amy's arm hanging out the door of a car wrapped around a tree. The other day, we caught her in an empty storage room with some other inmates. All the lights were off, and they were playing some sort of game. I shivered. Mark went on, "We put her into solitary confinement after that, and solitary breaks everybody. I've seen the toughest gangsters and most psychotic killers cry like babies after just a few days of solitary, but not her. Not Christina." We could see her on the camera, just staring into space. Mark trailed off. He cleared his throat. "Sorry if I seem a little freaked out by this. It's just, I was one of the COs who interrupted whatever game they were playing. And when the lights flickered on, I'd swear I saw something dark and horrible standing in the circle with the rest of them. It disappeared right away, and then, well, then I tried to put cuffs on Christina and she snapped my wrist like a goddamn twig." He gestured to his arm. "Look, don't tell many people in town about this, okay? I don't need everybody thinking I'm scared of a girl from high school." But he was scared. We both were, especially after I told him my side of the story. Mark believed me, and we kept tabs on Christina as best we could. But after she got out of prison, the trail went cold. It's only been a few weeks now, but I've noticed a disturbing trend. More and more people seem to be talking about the face game. When my friends and I played the face game, it was just some anonymous printout from an online chat room. Now it seemed to be showing up everywhere, in viral videos, in the conversations of kids walking home from school. Mark even found the rules of the face game stapled to a telephone pole near his house. It can only mean one thing. The outsider wearing Christina's skin is spreading the word about the face game. Is it trying to bring more of its kind to our world? Or find its way back where it came from? I don't have any answers. But when I walk through the streets of my old hometown, looking at the happy expressions of families out for an autumn evening stroll, I hear a sing-song voice repeating in my mind. I wonder, whose face will I find?" Story 4. This story is a true event that happened. Do not play the game read book. We were all in 8th grade and we were all obsessed with abandoned places, traveling, ghosts, etc. And since we knew that we were all departing to different high schools, we wanted to have one last fun time together as a friend group while we still could. My friend group consisted of 6 people, including myself. For the sake of their privacy, I will not be using their real names. My closest friend at the time was Mike. He lived in the house where all of this took place. He was very funny and cool, but his parents were extremely religious, so I'm still surprised that he was down to let us play these games at his house. Then there was Jenna, who I have known since elementary, and she had this weird love connection with Mike. Joey and Caroline were cool too. Joey was best friends with Mike since they were kids. Caroline was very loud and outgoing, and she claimed that she could feel spirits. I still think it's a bunch of bullshit. Lastly, it was Alan and I. He had this disturbing, obsessive crush on me. So of course during the whole sleepover, I was a little uncomfortable. Anyways, we had been planning this sleepover for a couple of weeks and it finally started to approach us. We planned to play childish games like Bloody Mary, Baby Blue, etc. During this whole sleepover and the planning of it, we all promised one thing. Do not mess with the ghosts, if we do encounter them. The day finally came and we all showed up to school with our regular backpacks, but also a bag with our PJs, toothbrushes, etc. The whole school day was exciting, thinking about all of the fun stuff we were going to do after school. And finally the end of the day came and we all walked to Mike's house. He lived pretty close to school. It was about a 7-minute walk. All of my friends were loud and funny, which was nice considering that I was sort of quiet. This made the walk on its own to be pretty fun. We made it to Mike's place and we all set our stuff down. Mike's family had a good amount of money, so his house was really nice. We spent the first few hours messing around. They went swimming for a little, I couldn't because I was on that time of the month. We walked to 7-Eleven to get slushies and candy. We went to a little playground in the middle of his neighborhood to take a couple of pictures for our social medias. So far the day was going completely as planned, and it was one of the best days of my life. We got back to his house, and since it was pretty dark we played hide and seek without flashlights for a while. It was around 9 o'clock and it was finally time to start playing the games. And we started off with the game Concentrate, which is a game where you close your eyes and the person behind you states a ritual about several ways you could die. At the end you are supposedly on an edge of a building in your mind, and the person behind you pretends to push you. Whatever color flashes in your mind while you are being pushed corresponds with how you die. Most of us got colors like blue, white, or green, which means drowning, passing away and going to heaven, and falling off a building. It wasn't until we got to Alan that we all started to get a little creeped out. It was his turn. We all sat on Mike's bed, while Joey stood behind Alan and did the ritual. When Alan was pushed off of the building in his mind, he was silent. We asked what color he got, and he said he got the color black. I had copied and pasted all of the games and the rules we were going to play into my notes on my phone. I turned on my phone and went straight to my notes, scrolling to find what the color black means. Black, they will die of old age and go to hell. Most of us aren't religious, so we just brushed it off and tried it again, and he kept getting the color black. Clearly being disturbed by this, Caroline suggested to play another game. We all agreed. We moved on to a game called Red Book. You play Red Book by getting into a circle around the red book that you have. Everyone playing puts their hand on the cover of the book when it's their turn, closing their eyes and asking, "Red Book, can I enter your game?" You keep your eyes closed and flip through the book randomly, stopping at any stop in the book that you want, and you point your finger anywhere on the page. When you open your eyes and see where your finger landed, that is the answer to your question. If you got a positive answer, or something related to accepting you into the book, then you can start playing. If it says no or something random, you move on to the next person and wait till it's your turn to ask again. I decided not to play, because I had a gut feeling not to play and I had to read the roles if anyone had questions. It took a while to get everyone into the game. But once everyone got accepted by the book, I reminded everyone that we will not disturb the ghosts, if we do encounter them. To which they all agreed. Caroline also decided not to play because she was afraid that she would come in contact with ghosts. So she stayed on her phone the whole time while blasting Lady Gaga in her earphones. The game started and it was boring. Every question we had, it ended with an unrelated answer, and we all started to give up hope until the answers started to become weirdly coincidental. "How old are you?" He was 13 years young. We all looked at each other. Some were freaked out, some were excited that we were finally getting somewhere. The game continued and the answers were very accurate. "Is there anyone else with you?" "They are frightening." I asked Jenna where she got this book, and she said she just found it on a bookshelf in her house. It didn't even have a title. It was Alan's turn. "How did you die?" We all started yelling at him to stop, since we agreed that we wouldn't ask the question. But he wouldn't stop. He kept flipping through the pages. And he was silent, and he wasn't moving other than his fingers flipping through the pages. We kept yelling, but he still did nothing. Almost like he was paralyzed. What scared us was when he got to the end of the book, he started flipping backwards. And he wouldn't stop. Finally he stopped. He dragged his fingers up and down the page, stopping towards the middle. We kept yelling at him, asking why he would do that, but he still didn't speak. Joey grabbed the book to see where his finger stopped. "We shouldn't speak of this." We all looked up at Alan and he was shaking. Jenna asked him what's wrong, but he just kept shaking. He suddenly just started crying. He put his face in his hands and he fell into Mike's arms. Alan has had panic attacks before, so we just thought that it was another panic attack. By the time that Mike had calmed down Alan, we asked him what happened. But he said he doesn't remember anything. He said he blacked out. Everyone agreed that we should end the game, but Alan said no. We tried convincing him to leave the game, but he kept saying no. So they continued, which I thought was so fucking dumb. but it was majority rule and I knew that none of them were going to listen to me. The more they asked questions, the creepier it got. "Where are you?" The door handle was cold. We all looked up at the bedroom door, it was locked. Everyone was scared, so we all agreed to end the game. But suddenly Alan talked for the first time since his last turn. "I have one more question." We all looked at him like he was crazy. We kept telling him no, but when it got back to him, we were accepting him to ask the book as he could leave. "What do you want with me?" He closed his eyes and flipped through the pages. He stopped at the end of the book on a blank page. He started scratching at his legs and he threw the book. The room was dead silent. He looked like he couldn't breathe. His veins were popping out of his neck and he started breathing hard. "Alan, are you okay?" Joey was the first one to talk to him, for what seemed like hours. Alan looked up at us finally, but he looked mad. He lunged at Joey and he just started scratching at his back and he was breathing heavy. Jenna jumped onto the bed with Caroline and I. I'm not gonna lie, I was crying because of how much was going on. Mike yanked Alan off of Joey and he pulled him back against the wall. Joey was able to stand up and stand on the other side of the room. It took a while for Alan to calm down, but when he did, Joey looked like he was attacked by a wild animal. There were scratches all over his back and sides, some so deep that his blood stained the rim of his shorts. Mike calmed Alan down again and none of us spoke for about 20 minutes, we just stared at the book and at Alan. Joey spoke first. "Okay, everyone calm down, Alan was probably just messing around, right Alan?" But Alan didn't speak. We all knew that he would never do this, he was one of the nicest people I have ever met at the time and he wouldn't even hurt a fly. We spent the rest of the night calming down and making jokes, trying to forget about what just happened. But none of us could ever forget about this. Words can't even describe every detail about how inhuman Alan looked. Everyone agreed to not play any other games and just watch movies and then go to bed. But even then, no one fell asleep until 3 to 4 in the morning. That morning, Mike's mom found out and her being the quirky, hippie, religious woman that she is. She had us group hug and she suggested that we burn the book. I was a little hesitant because Joey and Alan hadn't left the game yet. But everyone else agreed. So we went outside and we gathered around the book. "We don't tell anyone about this, okay?" Mike said. We all agreed, but I told my dad anyway because I'm really close to him and I was already planning on telling him. I'm pretty sure we all told our parents, but that's it. We let Alan do the honors of burning the book. After that, we just went on with our day. We watched movies and ate cereal. No one talked about it. Everyone got picked up one by one, and when I got picked up, we took Caroline home because she lived a block away from me. I told my dad and he suggested that he could have been faking it. I just agreed so we could stop talking about it. It's been almost 2 years now. And I go to a completely different high school. They all go to the city's most well-known high school. I talked to Mike maybe once or twice when we asked how school was and when he wished me happy birthday. I've only talked to Jenna once, since we share the same birthday. Other than that, I don't talk to any of the others. We haven't brought up the experience at all. I still have videos of us messing around on Snapchat and you can see the aftermath on Joey's back. Alan had asked me if I wanted to go out sometime after that sleepover, but I said no. I have an amazing boyfriend now and I haven't had a paranormal experience since. I still wonder if Alan was actually joking and it was just a practical joke gone wrong. Or if we did actually contact spirits that night. All I have to say is, don't play Red Book.